And at the beginning of everything, we are explained about the class of knights and how they can rise to the master rank in case the knight must completely break the predetermined stereotype, and to achieve this they need the help of a sword. In a flooded city about a fierce combat, the name of the legendary spear knight is called, so he appears in the middle of the conflict, sending the general flying with his spear, and with that, the vast continent Ig Grant had its war. The civil war of the Avalon Empire has ended, so we are told the name of the great hero of the spear, which in this case is Joshua Sanders. Although he was stopping the war alone at that time, he is completely helpless in his final moments. Then one of the traitors says that even though he's crazy about his brother, magical power and sacred power are the same thing after all. They both collide inside the body, and the man comments that if the hero were a normal person taking that shock, he would already be dead. Meanwhile, Joshua wonders why this is happening right to with him. After all, he never had the slightest desire to steal the throne. Instead, the only thing he wanted was to show the power of the weapon known as the spear, because in this way he could alleviate the shame of being the son of a concubine, and he could also help his master and only friend. And with the end of the civil war in the empire, Joshua only had a single goal for the rest of his life, was to become a shield to protect the Khazar Empire, von Britain, the emperor of Avalon. And then he feels pain again, and the man in front of him explains that in that world there are beings that are a danger just because they exist, and now that the war has come to an end, the emperor feels that he can rule without any danger imminent. But even so, Evergrande states that this emperor only fears one thing, namely Joshua himself, and listening to the hero remains silent. And the man explains that great martial artists spend their lives studying mana, but yet they take decades to be able to completely cover a small daga in sword aura, and in the case of Joshua can cover a spear the size of 2 people without any difficulty. So Everg asks how many enemies were killed with that spear, but Joshua remains silent, and the director informs that that sphere in his hand is the orb that was rolling in the historic site of Ammon. And after these explanations, another man appears and states that he was also afraid of Joshua. After all, his spear is in fact very intimidating, and that was already making the paranoid. So Evergrande thanks Joshua for his help, and in the end he says goodbye to him, calling him an old friend. And in his final moments, Kaiser decides not to look at the scene and walks away from the place. The hero stands up and states that he doesn't. It's the end of him. With that said, a circle of magical explosion opens over his feet. Then Joshua says now his title of legendary knight is a farce after all. He has just been betrayed by his longtime friend who he trusted that a lot. He deduces that he will end up dead in that forest, but Joshua still goes for it. But in the end, he comes across Lukia, the red spear known as Cruel Reaper of the battlefield. Then Joshua says he always was aware of a special force being hidden inside that spear. However, Vila showed his true strength, and such an opportune moment left him surprised, and with that he catches up with Lukia, and soon afterwards the floor collapses. Then Joshua finds a void that goes against his reputation as an invincible spear knight, but suddenly he reappears in a stable, and when remembering the explosion that should have ended his life, the boy begins to understand what is happening to this. Joshua looks at his reflection in the water and notices that his body is rejuvenating. Furthermore, he too is in the place where he used to live in the past, and when he notices that he has gone back in time, the boy gets excited because now he can do everything differently and avoid Caesar's betrayal. While the boy revels in the opportunity he received from a group of men goes to him and tells him to get back to work on this. Josa recognizes them as Agnos Dud's personal troop. Then Lloyd. He tells the boy that he must respond when someone speaks to him, but his friend next to him remembers that the boy is mute, so there would be no way for him to answer him. Anyway, Josa explains that he pretends not to know after all. He would be beaten even more if he opened his mouth to say anything, so Lloyd notices that he hasn't seen Lucy in a while time, but when saying that name, her colleague tells him not to say anything about her. After all, the Duke sometimes looking for this maid, so it's good that he doesn't say her name in such a careless way. Joshua realizes that they are talking about his mother, the Emperor's exclusive maid, and that he likes her. Agnos ended up having Joshua, and when his personal troops found out that the boy had noble blood, they started to get even more on his case, and at that time the boy had promised that he would one day take revenge on the TRS in front of him. In this, Lloyd continues playing with his luck and states that he wants to see Lucia that day, but RWS continues advising him to keep your mouth shut if you think about talking about this woman, but Lloyd claims that his friend cares, so after all, there is no one in that stable other than the boy. Other than that, he explains that Duchess Vanessa herself had already promised take responsibility if they disappeared Joshua and Lucia, and for him that would be the perfect moment to do this, but Lucia is not there now, and to compensate, Lloyd wants to have fun only with her son, so Royce immediately agrees to participate in the torment session, but Joshua says he won't let them insult his wife, mother, and if they are punished with this, he concentrates his mana and says that his way of performing this technique is different from the normal people because his technique was discovered in ancient ruins with his favorite spear, the Lukia, and because of the incredible impact she could have, the spear reached its peak very quickly. And as for her spear technique, mana, it is not made using a mana point under your abdomen. Instead, it uses the mana that is spread around the surroundings, because this way he will have an even greater amount of energy, and after that he absorbs the mana with all his might. His body, and because he didn't go through the standard mana formation process training, Joshua ends up jumping a process that takes other people entire years, so G forces himself even more when he looks at the boy's face, and I deduce that he has a short fuse because he was rejected by a woman earlier that day. G states that the boy won't be able to control his strength when hitting him, but suddenly he notices Joshua with his eyes closed and deduces that the boy fainted standing up, but he was actually concentrating to get some mana, although before it would have taken a boy 10 years to move that amount of mana. Now he knows how to do it faster. In this, Gort, he tries to attack him, but when he is hit by the boy, he falls to the ground crying in a shameful way, and there is this unexpected scene. His friends are surprised by this Joshua Anna, which is something very violent and worrying right away. Below his abdomen, which should be empty, then he remembers that this had never occurred before he returned to the past, and as for Lloyd, he decides to act and states that the boy should be killed for attacking one of the troops' men. And upon seeing him approaching, Joshua notes that it will be very dangerous to face a trained soldier wielding a long sword, but he still believes that if he can hit Lloyd, Royce won't attack. After all, he is the most careful of the three and would never agree to get into a losing fight. That said, he focuses on his mother again, and Lloyd continues going. Even the boy intends to kill him, but Joshua dodges his sword and hits him with a punch equipped with mana. Royce notices that even though the boy didn't know how to speak, he was harboring an absurd power. And besides, he just seeing his two colleagues being defeated with a stinging goal. However, using just that power, Joshua already feels a lot worn out and sore, but he still poses as unbeatable, so Royce doesn't suspect that he's already very weak, so he imposes his voice and tells Royce to pass on a message and listen to the boy speaking for the first time. Royce is startled, and Joshua says that anyone who insults his mother again will not leave him, including the men from Troop of Agnos. These words echo in Royce's mind, leaving him disturbed, and so he decides to run from boy so as not to end up getting worse like his friends. And then Joshua falls to the ground exhausted, and after that some servants comment on this incident where the stable boy beat up 3 water centurions and beyond. One of the men says that there are rumors that the boy isn't actually mute as everyone thought, and with all this happening among men, it is strange that Joshua beat 3 centurions even though he was CCO years younger than Babel. In that, he assumes that there is something wrong with this story, and the other servant states that the rumors must have increased what fact happened, because for him there is no way a mute child who was abandoned by his family would be able to defeat 3 centurions with clean hands. But the other man says that if the rumors are indeed true, the positions of the children of the Duke, who are in the line of succession, can change. For another servant states that even Joseph's abilities being officially recognized, he still will not be able to defeat Master Babel, agreeing with the opinion of his colleague. After all, young Master Babel is currently a mana user, and upon hearing this, one of the men says that Brown is right. After all, Master Agnos himself became a magic user at the age of 16, but in the case of Babel he became a magic user at the age of 14, therefore, he must be an exceptional genius capable of even surpassing the powers of the Master Agnes. Someday said this. The servant states that no one can compete with Babel for succession, but in saying this, Joshua goes to them, leaving everyone surprised by his sudden arrival, so the boy asks them to inform him The Duke Agnos he has just arrived and already in the Agnos room he is surprised by Rolls and when asked about his affiliation RW responds that he is from the 29th Battalion. Agnes notes that this is the Grisman Tiffin Battalion and then he asks his assistant to bring a special piece of armor and when showing the state of the equipment, he asks the Roll if it was indeed Joshua who did this damage to that armor, but before he gave his answer, the assistant to the side suggests that the warrior thinks carefully before giving his answer because if he is caught lying he will not be forgiven. Then Ross reaffirms everything he had said and guarantees that he is not lying, saying that Agnos asks Shervan what he thinks about it and he states that it is practically impossible for Roll to be telling the truth and even agreeing with the improbability of this having happened, he decides to investigate this matter and asks the age of Joshua. In his chiffon responds that the boy is 9 years old, so Agnos believes that it is in fact impossible that the boy at this age he destroyed an armor made of leather unless he made use of mana, and upon hearing this, Chiffon immediately apologizes for his insolence but states that it is impossible for Joshua to have used mana. After all, even the moment in the history of the entire continent there has never been a case where a 9-year-old child was able to use mana in a real fight. Besides, even though Joshua proves to be a great genius, it is still necessary to be a knight of rank, be a lot of talent to cover his bare hands with human, and all these reasons lead Chiffon to not believe that a 9-year-old boy managed to accomplish this feat with such success. Therefore he believes that in fact the 3 centurions were afraid of discovering their mistreatment of Joshua, and to avoid this they would need to come to the waters and come up with a nonsense excuse like that, and then he asks for permission to take Rose to the outside and give him a punishment to teach him the discipline of a member of the Agnos Corps. However, RW says again that he is telling the truth, but this time with a firmer voice. Sherfan says no. Raise his voice in Duke's presence and orders him to tell the whole truth immediately. Then RW explains that he is telling the truth, but Chiffon still doesn't believe it. And in this he threatens to take away his sword sheath, but we are told says that this is enough. However, Chiffon remains furious and tells his master that they must not leave Rose spreading false rumors around without receiving punishment for it, so Agnos states that they will know if the story is lie only when they find Joshua. Said this, he decides to go to the boy on his own. After all, it was time. The two meet for the first time and Chiffon is incredulous and wonders if Agnos would really get along, moving just to see the son of a simple concubine. In this he notices that Agnos has never shown so much interest. So on the young Master Babel, who is known to be the greatest genius in the Empire, so the Duke asks where he is. The boy and Chiffon informs him that he has just arrived, therefore he must be in the waiting room on the first floor. Said this, Agnos asks his servant to show him the way to Joshua and he immediately obeyed. Meanwhile, the son of Duchy goes to Joshua to pick a fight with him, but the boy focuses all his attention only on a portrait of the current Emperor of Avalon, Marcos von Britain, and he comments that he always feels very angry when he sees this portrait, so he goes back to take his revenge against the traitor Caesar von Britain, in which Babel notices that he is being ignored and decides to leave for up with a punch from the back, but Joshua manages to stop the attack. I feel the pressure of the Babel boy's fists. Begins to have a slight suspicion that Joshua may have defeated the 3 Anians, but the boy still claims that he will not surrender without first fighting Joshua, but now he arrives just in time to separate the two in this Babel-s. Kneel in reverence to your P. Then Agnos asks what the boy was doing attacking Joshua, and he explains that he was just exchanging some warm greetings, and quoting Joshua, he just nods his head at Doke, and when he sees such disrespect towards the figure of Agnos, Chiffon advises the boy to review his manners, and furthermore he sends him gratify the Duke appropriately, and when turning his vision to his subordinate, Agnes notices that Chiff is flooded with evil, and what to the boy he explains that when he saw a portrait of the current emperor it reminded him of the face of Caesar, and this in turn made him feel a lot of hatred to the point that he could not control his emotions. Right, but he knows that this is not a good thing. After all, Agnos doesn't usually let anyone who demonstrates it go unnoticed. Hostility towards him, and even though he is a child, this would also apply to him, so Agnes asks the boy approach him so he can check whether Joshua used human or not in the fight against the Centurions and hear it. Babel refuses to believe that a boy who cleans stables could be a mana user like him, so Chiffon tries to convince his master not to do something so aimless. But Agnos follows his desire and sends the boy go to him. In this, Josa remembers that Agnes is one of the 5 masters of the vast empire. This gives him a mana's sensitivity is much greater than that of other ordinary people, and Joshua states that if he finds any abnormal symptoms in his body, his plants will go down the drain. So Aini simply grabs his arm, and when he feels the boy's mana, he makes a face of astonishment. Then Agnos states that there is nothing in the boy, and hearing this, Babel feels relieved. Then Chiffon states that Joshua never had mana from the beginning, but Agnos says he is talking about the mana hole after all. All humans have at least one basic mana. This extends even to mere monsters. However, in Joshua, he is not able to feel any mana, so Chiffon notices that if the boy does not have mana, he is very similar to undead who moves only with demonic power. In this, he suggests the Agnes that there may be humans who naturally they are already born without mana, and Duke believes that instead of Joshua not having mana naturally, he must have some mysterious sticky on his mana point, causing it to dissipate, so he decides that he will watch the boy for now, and tells Chiffon he remembers about the rumors involving the boy and states that if Joshua doesn't have mana, something, and it means that the rumors are false, so they must put Ross under suspicion. However, Agnes explains that a centurion is the possession of the duck, and for this reason, he must not punish any of them without first being sure of that they told a lie, and upon hearing this, Chiffon confesses that he ended up thinking very hastily, and what Joshua Agnos asks the boy to live there for now. After all, they have several empty rooms, but hearing this, his son starts to screaming and tries to stop him, but Agnos just asks his son if he has a problem or not about that, and Babel decides to just accept his father's decision. In that, Agnes asks Chiffon to teach him lessons in basic mana cavalry to Joshua tomorrow morning, and if the boy shows any talent, Chiffon should show him the method of the Red Knights on how to use mana. But upon hearing this, the servant asks the Duke again about the boy not having mana, so it doesn't make sense to teach him, but Agnos just tells Chiffon to obey him and wait to see whether or not Joshua will be able to use his mana. After all, if what the boy has is not a natural mana deficiency, it will be better for them. That being said, he states that he will await the boy's return in the next year of Akkad, so Joshua is taken to the room where he will stay there for a while. Chiffon wonders if the rumors about him not being able to speak are true after all. The boy doesn't show any reaction even after gaining so many benefits and after leaving her at ease in his new room. Chivon retires. Then Joshua notes a greater rudeness on the servant now that he is no longer there, more in Duck's presence. But he soon puts that aside because now his only concern is resting. So the boy remembers about Agnes putting expectations on him for the next year, and because of spending money most of the year in Akkad's Golden Castle, Joshua believes that he has now returned to his Feldo to rest, and to the thinking again about his contact with him. The boy deduces that Agnos has discovered something about his sister that he didn't even know. Even he knew, and for him this is a sign of danger. However, his main concern for now is recover all the strength he once had, and to start looking for this he leaves the room that night, but when leaving, throwing himself out the window as he falls, he feels his mana flowing into his body, causing a mass of bad energy. From your mana hole gets all mixed up, and Joshua notes that these energies are the sacred power and the power demonic. However, there is another force restricting this energy. In this case, that is Lukia's strength, her spear. Then Josa wonder why Lukia's powerful force would be inside her body and restrict in these two energies, while then 2 guards hear the sound of the boy falling and soon go towards the location, but Joshua manages to hide behind time, and one of the guards is confused because he was sure he heard something, and returning to the boy he comments that there is a good chance that the key to his mana problem is in Lukia, and he states that if he is able to transform L's energy, it is your junta, the other 2, this will benefit you a lot. Meanwhile, the 3 centurions go to Lucia, and she asks what they want from this. G explains that because of her son their reputation went to shit, so he threatens to take his sword, but Lucia bites Lloyd's arm just in time to free herself. But when she tries to run, she ends up tripping and falls on the floor, hitting her head, and hearing the mess she committed. Lloyd catches her and says he didn't punish her for real for this. G tell him to keep holding her, so they can take care of this matter soon, but before Roll stops him and asks if it's really okay to do that. After all, if Joshua finds out about them they will definitely be screwed, but G says he doesn't care about that. After all, they are there just to punish him. But Rouse again tries to stop him and says that it's not right, so they must stop immediately, but Gore remembers that Duchess Vanessa had already promised to take responsibility for everything. That if they say that, go tell Rolls to go away. If you're chickening out on this, Lloyd reaffirms that his friend, he said, and also suggests that the scared kittens get out of there, and hearing this makes him think about who he would be, calling him a scared cat. And in the middle of all this confusion, Joshua appears and tells the men to stop what they are doing. Then G states that he was already waiting for him. But Rose is still scared and asks her friends not to tease the boy more because Joshua is no longer the child they used to know. Joshua states that they didn't get out alive, and hearing the boy's message, Rouse gets even more scared and asks them to get away again. Otherwise they will be killed by Joshua, but G calls him a coward, so the boy sends someone who was hiding. Appears, then Lloyd simply starts walking towards the boy to kill him, but before that Joshua orders him again. The guy appears. Then the Night King jumps up to him and wonders how Joshua managed to feel his presence, and upon seeing the cross on the subject's clothing, Joshua notes that it is a mark that only the Order of the Red Knights. So he says that Chiffon ordered this guy to follow him, and he notices that that boy is the son of the rumored concubine, and tells the boy he claims that a soldier tried to hurt a lady from the Duck's house. Saying this, he asks how they will deal with this situation. Then Kane feels a mysterious force in his body, one that was probably coming from the boy. Then he states that the soldiers who did this should be punished immediately, so he goes for it of Lloyd and attacks him. In so Gore tries to protect his friend, but he ends up being captured, and with the intention of calming down in his spirits, he asks Kane to wait and not take hasty actions. But instead he continues punishing the Centurions, and when he arrives at Ross, he begs for forgiveness, but Kane stops talking in case he wants to live a little longer. And in between of all this, Joshua tells him to stop, but Sim still says that he is just punishing the three men for them put the Duke's wife in danger. Then Josa explains that Kane is one of the third-generation knights who are well known in the Duchy. However, he is part of the Row Knights, who are known for being the most weak, and because he was supposedly placed to observe him, Joshua believes that Kane is new to the team of bad knights, but he still deduces that the young man is one of the strongest within the C-rank ranks. After all, he can dominate 3 Centurions with just a few sword movements. Like these reflections, Joshua asks him who is his master, and Kane says he is the Duke Agnos, and the boy asks if he knows who Joshua is and faces him. Sim notices an intense and fierce look on him, which reminds him of an acquaintance. The boy tells him to put away his sword, and Kaneho obeys Rose immediately. He thanks Joshua for saving his life and states that he will serve him loyally. But upon hearing this, Joshua says he doesn't need the loyalty of people like him. Besides, the boy says he won't let no one who laid a hand on his people's lives, so he asks RWS to tell others everything he witnessed. And besides, furthermore, Joshua guarantees that if something like that happens again, he himself will cut the 3 soldiers' throats, saying that and tell RW to get out of there. Then Kane asks if the boy really is the Count he knows. After all, he is very different from the Count in his memories. So the boy remembers that he is still the despised cleaner of the stable. That being said, Kane explains that all soldiers who are under the command of the K. Agnos can choose their own 25-year-old master, and how he will turn 25 next year. Kane will also face this decision then. He states that he will choose Joshua to be his master because his instincts are telling him to do so, but Joshua notes that his correct decision would have been to choose the young Master Babel, who the boy calls eccentric. And soon then his mother finally wakes up and hugs him. Then Josu says he will protect her from now on, and when he remembering the chance he received to go back in time, Joshua feels grateful because now he can do everything differently. Instead of simply standing still and shy in places like before, and he claims that now he will no longer be remembered as a bastard son of a humble stable, but as a man holding the strongest spear in the history of Continente. Meanwhile, at Agnes Chiffon Castle, reports that Count Rebrika paid for a visit and is now in the reception room. However, he informs that the Kund is not alone this time, as he is now accompanied by Iseline, and when you hear this, you feel like you're just trying to put an end to the pending issue, so it's explained to us a little about the two. In the case of Brika, his stats are a little lower compared to Duduk, but he is a person who cannot be disregarded due to his influence within the Empire. And Iseline, she is the daughter of Rebrake and one of the most talented people who are being observed alongside Babel. Furthermore, she is also considered a magical genius. For having entered Class 2 when I was just a year old, I will tell you a little more about Sis. We are told about seeing people who are genetically incapable of using it due to being affected by the mana curse, but on the other hand, there are those people who are genetically capable of using it very well because they were blessed with the mana blessing, and in Iseline's case, she was one of the people who received the mana blessing, and the users of this gift can feel and respond to mana without needing to learn it, and because of this phenomenon is known as the best gift given by the gods among the magicians. And upon returning to the two fingers squeak that Babel is so nervous. After all, the boy is already very close to adulthood. Furthermore, there is Lady Charlie, who in this case is the other child. Skilled at this, Chiffon explains that the 5 duchies of the Avalon Empire were very influential in the empire, the way of them, but in Charlie's case she is from the Font family, which was pointed out as a duchy that only possesses its wealth. That said, Chiffon deduces that the best decision to make is to choose Charlie if Agnos take the polite source in consideration. Then he notes that Agnos is in fact greedy for talented people besides also having a lot of ambition in military and power issues, and upon noticing him very quiet, Chiffon asks what Agnos has is he asks by Joshua and says he will give Elin to the boy, and hearing this Chiffon is discredited, and as for the boy he will even an old local man who used to climb because that way he was closer to his dead mother. Joshua reveals that discovered a hidden tunnel in that place, and it was precisely in that tunnel that he found Lukia, in which he dripped a drop of his blood in the middle of a magic circle on the ground. Then Josa enters a portal that takes him to an old temple. However, the boy doesn't know the current place because in his memory he wasn't as devastated as he is now, and besides, Luke, it was located in the altar in the center of the temple, but now the place is just with a metal rod, and trying to touch it a strong light obscures Joshua's vision. Then the boy is taken to a completely white and empty place with the stick of steel talks to him and says that it is the artifact of the demon god Lukia. Then Josa discovers that the spear he always used also changed her appearance, in that that she has changed her appearance because of him returning to the past, and things changed. That being said, the new Lukia explains that the boy's 2 energies will reduce his life as the time passes, but Luke states that there is a way for him to stop this and use both energies to his advantage in case the boy will need to reach stage 4 of the magic spear art, in which Josa remembers that he was learning this ancient technique that he discovered with help of their mana technique. And as for the other knights, they all only use swords as their weapons because for them the spear was a simple toy, but still Joshua was practically unbeatable as he was already in stage 5 of the art of the magic spear. And when making a parallel with Hangs, Joshua informs that the ranking knight could use mana to form a sword. The so-called masters were of absolute rank. Although the art of the magic spear was divided into 8 stages, he was already the greatest knight in the empire, even though he was only in the 5th stage of this technique. So if he reaches stage 4, Joshua will have enough strength to overcome the strongest B-rank knight. And because he has already done this before, he believes that it will not be that difficult to reach the stage of this technique. However, the problem is the time he needs to do this, but Lukia says he doesn't need to worry because the boy will be able to use mana without any side effects up to a certain point, and Luke guarantees that once the boy reaches the culmination and him gaining his powers back, Joshua will certainly achieve his dream. So he asks what this means, but Lukia disappears and the boy returns to the same temple before, and in that he takes the Lokia because with him, Joshua will be able to use his mana without side effects for a while. That being said, he activates stage 1 of the spear art. Magic. Then Josa concentrates his mana on a specific point on the weapon and throws it forward, whereupon the boy releases a explosive burst and tells Caesar that this is just the beginning because his real goal is to take everything from him. Meanwhile, Agnos goes to the reception hall for his castle's guests. Then Sherry goes to greet him, and Cox apologizes for visiting at this time, but Agnos says everything is fine after all. It is very difficult for the two of them to see each other. There Agnos proposes that he work for his house, and hearing this Sherry says that he shouldn't try to steal the treasure of another person is so straight-faced, and as they sit down to talk, Sherry comments about Babel becoming a knight of rank C, and with that she deduces that promoting herself as a genius is also a good idea, but Cox says that she is going too far. Then he apologizes to Agnos again, and then he remembers that Rebreak is also there so easily. Duke introduces himself and Sherry stands in the background, disdaining the girl and asking why she is there and listening. Cox asks the girl to stop Gur, so Sher comments on Agueda's bastard son having defeated 3 Centurions, and she asks if this rumor is in fact true. Cox tells her to stop saying such things again. But Sherry says she's just asking about something she's unsure about. So Cox explains that there are risks to Sherry leaving. Then, asking questions about a rumor with no confirmation whatsoever, Chiffon says he is right after all. This story is just a false rumor because young Master Joshua is not only weak but also he was also born with the mana curse, so there would be no way for a person like that to defeat 3 Centurions, and upon seeing this, Rebra is amazed and asks if in fact the second count has the mana curse, so Agnes suggests that Rebra fell. Take a look at the boy on his own. After all, he is one of the few 5th-class mages in the Empire, and that makes even more sensitive to mana than he is, and seeing an opportunity to gain some points with Agnes, he agrees to go see the boy. However, Chiffon suggests that first of all he analyzes the condition of young Master Joshua regarding his possible natural mana deficiency. After all, this could also help them discover the validity of the rumor, but or see. This Agnes asks how he plans to confirm these things. Then Shervan says he can summon a knight from his insignia to compete with Joshua in this. Agnos understands the idea, but strange the fact of putting a red knight to fight against a 9-year-old child. In that, Chiffon explains that if the boy is as strong as the rumors, they say he needs to face an opponent of this level, and within his insignia the perfect candidate for this fight. And the next day Shervan tells Cain that he received his report, and with that he discovers that Joshua had another friction with Santer. Then the Chiffon states that Cain must apply an immediate punishment of this type of the situation. However, he explains that the Centurions plan to harm a lady from Doke's house, and when Chiffon saw this, he is surprised and asks if Cain is really telling the truth, so he deduced that the Centurions were bothering him to Vanessa, but Cain confirms that it was actually Lucia, and upon hearing this, Chiffon feels more relieved and criticizes him for incapacitating 2 Centurions just for a worthless concubine. But Cain claims that Lucia is a respectable lady of the Duke's house, therefore common soldiers should not have the right to harm her after all the actions that the 3 took over with an insult and a challenge to Doke. However, Cain is willing to be punished if he acted in recklessly against the Centurions, but Chiffon decides to leave this story aside and says he has another job to do next, in case the job will be a contest against the young Master Joshua. So he explains that the idea of all this is to confirm whether or not the boy has the curse to mana, but Chiffon still believes that the result shows a deficiency of natural mana, and Shervan says that he should confirm this soon to Agnes, because at this rate the story will be a big obstacle for the young Master Babel, so Chiffon is afraid of Babel be passed over, and upon seeing this Chiffon tells him to stop talking nonsense and says that young Master Babel is a genius, unique, therefore he will not be surpassed by anyone. But Cain feels that he is the complete opposite. After all, the boy he saw him sweating with the meteor coming towards Earth to blow everything up. Chiffon explains that Cain must inject mana into Joshua during the dispute without anyone noticing, because if the boy was born without mana, his body will certainly rejecting it, causing the substance to act like poison, killing the boy within 10 days. This falls into the category of Chiffon is willing to show his true face shamelessly, and so he orders Siam to wait in the small field of training because Joshua and the boys will soon be taken there, and upon arriving at the location, he refuses to hurt the young man. Master Joshua, the boy goes to him and says that he found out about the dispute they were having, so Cain says that they just want to confirm his abilities. Furthermore, he informs that Duke himself has plans to ask for a dispute. In this, Joshua notes that Agnos recognized his strength, but Cim says he has no plans to compete for real against the boy, and hearing this, Joseph wonders if he is just going to test him. Then the boy explains that even os knights can choose their master. As count, he also has the authority to choose his subordinate in the. However, Josh states that he has no plans to trust his back to someone so weak, so the boy tells him to fall. Do your best if you want to see his true self, and in the middle of this whole conversation, Kagas finally shows up. Then they both salute the Duke, and Agnes notes that Joshua has learned the etiquette of the kingdom well, even without having to teach it to him separately, but Joshua explains that he learned this just by watching others do it. And returning to the main topic, Joshua explains that he is already aware of the test they will do with him. However, Chiffon says that it is more of a consideration than a test after all. The objective of Agnos is to examine and stay the boy's disability with the intention of heal him, and upon hearing this, the boy notes that in fact Sean's intention is to kill him, as he is on Babel's side. That being said, Agnos tells the two to start the dispute, but he explains that Joshua's opponent will not be Cain, but his own son Babel, and in this the boy promises that he will help cure his brother's disability, so AG informs us that they will use wooden swords. After all, that's just training. I hear that. Mabel understands her father's decision and says that also has no interest in fighting for real. Joshua feels that Babel and Shivan's plans are to end anyway, but he takes a wooden stick and says that he will show them why, in fact, fencing is in this. He breaks the stick in half and says that that will be enough for me to come across the scene. Cheryl says that the boy is hilarious in this. Cox tries again to control his madam's acidic speeches and tells Chiffon he informs the boy that training is not a joke, so he should take it more seriously. He said that, asks what Joshua intends to do with that stick, but Agnos interrupts him and asks if the boy is sure that we'll use this weaponry. In this, Joseph confirms that yes. Then Agnes tells everyone to go to their places, and before the fight, in fact, to begin with, he advises his son Babel not to use mana, and the boy states that it would be a waste to use mana. His man and a bastard like Joshua. As the fight begins, Cain stands in the background just wondering what Joshua is planning, so Babel tells the boy that he won't be defeated just with a stick like that, but he says that something like this fits very well with Joshua's mediocrity. Having said that, now tell them to start the match. Then Joshua takes the lead and fires an attack towards Babel, so the arrogant boy feels that Joshua actually learned something somewhere, but Babel claims that it is still meaningless. Meanwhile, Joshua analyzes his enemy and notices that even though he is a C-rank knight, the boy is still very simple and only has speed. In this, he hits Babel's arm, and when he finds himself in this situation, the boy starts to disdain Joshua and says that he remains just an illegitimate son who cannot even have his own name in the ranks. That said, he tries to go up, but Joshua hits him with a direct blow to the boy's stomach, so he claims that Babel until he withstood the fight very well, and the boy disobeys his father's order and tries to use a weapon to fight against Joshua, and when he notices, that's when Agnos tells his son to stop that, but the boy continues with the attack, leaving Claro on the spot. His sword breaks, and when they look at Joshua's weapon, they notice that the boy also has mana, so Babel refuses believing in this. After all, it doesn't make sense for this to be happening. Then the boy gets angry and claims that he will be the successor of the Duchy, but Joseph remembers that educated will come to an end 10 years after the battle within the empire. But even so, Joshua believes that it will be of great help to have their support for now, as this way he will be able to see his plans bearing some fruit. With that being said, the two start attacking each other, but he tells us the boys to stop and says, who will punish them if they don't obey. And as for Chiffon, he wonders how the boy has mana even though he only has 9 years old. After all, this is an unprecedented event in history. In other words, Joshua had a feat. Incredible, so Agnes asks Chiffon if that would be enough, but Rebreak enters their conversation, interrupting Chiffon from speaking, and says that what came out of Joshua was in fact mana, and even though it was a tiny mana, compared to Babel, yet the boy's mana type is different from anything they know, especially when comes to focus. Meanwhile, Sherry and Cain are surprised to discover that Joshua actually can making use of mana at such a young age. Agnos comments to the boy that in fact what he did is an achievement. Incredible, but Chiffon tries to disqualify the boy based on his unknown mana, but still Agnos states that what he witnessed is enough, so Chiffon accepts his master's words in this. Agnes says that he still needs to check some things on Joshua, so he calls the boy to his quarters that night. I steal Chiffon and Babel are astonished after all. The Doug I never saw called anyone to his quarters in that Babel if becomes even more enraged and wonders how a mere stable-keeper could be so surprising and tells Joshua he accepts his father's request and says he will see him that night, and after that Shelley comments on the boy and says he's amazing, but Cogs asks her to calm down to avoid losing her dignity, but the girl gets excited again and states that it shouldn't be possible for a 9-year-old child to already be a magic user, so Joshua is the best, but she says she is a little bothered by the fact that the boy is an illegitimate son, but even so, she intends to make him her possession. Meanwhile, Duchess Vanessa attacks. Chiffon is informed that her son lost the fight, but he says again that Babel was defeated by Joshua and, as expected, she slaps him in the face again. Then she asks if the boy used man on her son, and, in addition, she questions whether Joshua is better with mana than Babel. Chiffon only informs that Agnes has plans to take Joshua to the city of. After all, the boy demonstrated enormous potential and ISO certainly piqued his interest, so Vanessa claims that if Chiffon had done his job, these things wouldn't be happening. Then he asks her not to worry anymore as he has a way to turn this around. Game in their favor. I offer. Vanessa asks what he's up to, and Chiffon D2 wants to tell them to the entire empire that Joshua is a C-rank mana user, in that Vanessa claims that he is still saying things meaningless, but he explains that both Agnes and the two cones saw with their own eyes the moment in which Joshua used his brother, and for that reason Duke will certainly ask the boy to take a test, in which case it will be the test to be officially named as a C-rank knight, and to take this test the candidate must demonstrate that he or she is able to use man in a battle royale against a royal knight, and upon hearing that the boy will possibly fight against a royal knight, Vanessa decides to inform her uncle about this. Meanwhile, Joshua goes to Agnos, and then he asks who the boy is, and he introduces himself as Joshua von Agnos, and the Duke states that the boy has changed a lot since the last time he saw him. The boy comments that it has indeed been a long time since they last met. And suddenly Agnos asks the boy if he hates him, and Joshua says no. After all, there's no way Agnos would expect much from him. A situation where the boy should be careful with the royal castle, but he still says he has a request to be made. Done, and hearing this Agnos asks what the boy wants, and Joshua comments on his supposed going to Akkad, so Agnes he asks why the boy thought he would be taken there, and he explains that he has two reasons for thinking that way. The first way is that Agnes' successor until now was Babel. However, with the appearance of Joshua, the boy's succession was put in check to avoid greater chaos. Agnos could have been thinking about removing him from kingdom, and hearing this, Agnos notices that the boy doesn't just have talent in battle because his deduction is also excellent at this. He regrets are not having created Joshua sooner, and well, his other deduction is that greed. Agnes people encourage him to make this decision. After all, he must be afraid of Joshua becoming so strong that he surpass him too, and this could put the Agnes Duchy in danger to the point that they need not be careful with the royal castle. I finish this second theory. Agnos comments that the boy really seems to believe in his potential to surpass him in this. Joshua states that at least he won't disappoint me if I hear this. Agnes deduces that the boy is sure that he is capable of doing everything he proposed, and Joshua says yes. After all, Agnos would be with plans to send him to the CAD Academy, so he explains that the noble children of the Avalon Empire must study at the CAD Academy for 6 years, starting at 10 and stopping at 15. However, there are cases where students graduate earlier depending on their talent, and the reason why the royal castle created such a system is so that they can take children hostage through the academy to gain royal talents. That said, Agnos confirms that of fact will take Joshua to the city, and in addition he will also help you with your studies when he is around. In this, Shah feels honored to be able to learn the sword from one of the 5 masters of the empire, but the boy says that in fact his plan is to use spears as a weapon. Agnes is surprised. After all, no one sane conscience would choose a spear to be his main weapon, and soon afterwards he releases all his mana in front of the boy. Then Joshua notices that there is an overwhelming amount of mana to the point where he can barely stand on this. Joshua states that he is very proud of his spear and will use it to destroy those who stand in his way. path, and this even includes the 9 stars that Agnes is part of. This Duke asks the boy to show personally the value in his spear. After all, now it's his turn to test Joshua's skills in this. The boy feels that he will not have another opportunity to challenge one of the 9 stars, therefore he must grab that one opportunity, but he puts a condition on this fight in case if he wins. Joshua wants to make a request to the Duke, then explains that if the boy passes the test he will be able to use a spear as a weapon and make the request in the. However, if he speaks the test, the boy will have to follow his commands. Joshua D2 that those commands be sending him to the academy to learn fencing, and once he is exempt, he accepts Duck's proposal. Meanwhile, Madame Vanessa meets with her uncle and states that something unpleasant happened in the Duchy, and because of that she will need. It's a favor from him that I find myself facing a confrontation against Ogno. Joshua notes that the guy is indeed an incredible master. After all, his body doesn't stop shaking with emotion. Babel goes to him and asks to talk, but Josa refuses to do so. Say anything to the boy because the matter between them is over, but Babel asks them to fight again and look for him. Joshua Anna, the boy with a different look than before. In this case he has the look of a person who feels the need to never lose, so he asks if Babel is confident. And meanwhile in the Grand Imperial Castle, Duke Marcos is informed about another child of Agnes who was born with a natural talent to become a star in this. His servant confirms this information and also informs that the son in question is the bastard son of Duke Agnos. In this, Marcos comments that Babel in itself is already a treasure, but now Agnos has 2 treasures, so he says he is jealous of that, but Marcos guarantees that these 2 boys do not have enough battle power to become the emperor, and upon seeing this his servant feels that Marcos is misevaluating the princes because when he was young he was already powerful enough to become a master, so his standards are much higher than average, and that is why his desire for talents is usually very excessive. And Marcos deduces that Joshua is at least around the level of Babel, otherwise Agnes would not have made the boy official as a noble. Furthermore, serves informs about a rumor regarding Babel having lost a fight against Joshua, and to see this, Marcos is surprised and asks the boy's age, and the servant says that Joshua turned 9 recently, so Marcos interested in this and says that there may possibly be several people interested in testing the skills of the boy. The servant explains that the order of knights from the imperial castle will be sent at the request of the man himself. Agnos, after all, the boy is already close to the C-rank level, and upon hearing this Marcos becomes even more curious about this boy. Then the servant thinks that his master will try to go to him and test his mana personally, in which he himself Emperor confirms that he will see the boy indirectly, so he orders his servant to send a prince to go and see Joshua. Meanwhile, the boy returns to fighting his brother, and in the middle of the fight, Babel notices that even Joso's sister being in his hand, he still has a lot of power, in that Jos states that he is able to know what his brother is thinking just looking at him, and then he guarantees that he will show the true terror of the martial arts that his brother so despises. And hearing this, Babel gets angry and attacks the boy, but an explosion throws him away, so Babel notices that Joshua transferred hum to a specific part of his body, and Babel refuses to accept it but claims that Joshua is in fact much stronger than him. In that, the boy notices that his brother is frustrated with something, so he suggests that Babel learns and becomes stronger, because only then will he surpass him. In this, he tells the boy to never forget that feeling of defeat, and he also states that he would kill Babel. After all, he insulted both him and his mother, but the moment he saw exceptional military power in the boy's eyes, he says he ended up giving up this idea of exterminating him, but Ju states that if Babel doesn't change his attitudes, he will leave him incapacitated to fight with his sword again. And when he sees this, the boy swallows hard, and in addition Joshua also comments that there is a difference in the height of his looks now that he has been defeated. And the next day Joshua wakes up complaining about the fatigue and explains that he used a lot of mana the day before without taking any break from it. He notices that his control of mana is much looser after he absorbed Lukia's main body. However, upon seeing the side effects, he feels that his body is still not capable of handling this amount of mana. As he reflects on these things, Joshua hears someone knocking on his door, and when he opens it, the boy comes across Sherry. Then she introduces herself with a resident of the Fond Kingdom and made the introduction sure, says he can call her big sister after all the boy is years younger than her. That said, she enters Joshua's room and says that there is a lot to say, but the boy prevents her from moving any further by simply cursing the girl and closing the door in her face. So she continues to hit the girl door, but Joshua decides to just ignore her, but that doesn't work either as Sherry keeps knocking on the door. So Joseph again, he tells her to go on her way in a very polite way, but when he opens the door he discovers that whoever was on the other side next door was Cain, and upon noticing the boy so angry, he says he will come back later, but Joshua apologizes, so he explains who has already made the preparations that Joshua asked for, but he claims that he doesn't understand the reason for all this. The boy asks to. He will just obey you and follow you without questioning anything, because over time he will find out the reason for his actions. And in the meantime, one of the soldiers asks Royce, where is Lloyd Gord in this? The soldier asks if the two were really beaten by Joshua. I hear this. Ross remains silent. Then the soldier asks his friend who called Centurions to that training area, and his colleague informs him that it was one of the Red Knights who requested the request. Cain goes ahead of everyone and the soldiers are surprised Joshua's presence at the knight's side and tells Royce he is scared to see the boy once again. Then Cain explains that Joshua will help them with the day's lesson, and the boy introduces himself to everyone and states that they, as Centurions of Agnes, you have the duty to become commanders who will take the vanguard during the war, and therefore reason Joshua says that each person's individual skills are very important, therefore he is there precisely to make this judgment appropriately, and having said that he orders all the soldiers to attack him, but they take it as a joke, so it falls over. Asks if the young master is serious. The Centurions say that the boy will get hurt a lot in this game. After all, even though the boy is being punished, it sounds like an insult to all the Centurions in this. Joshua goes to Rose and asks if he too has the same confidence as his friends, and Rouse promptly says no, because he would never think he has a chance against Joshua, and the boy asks if RWS told the Centurions what he had ordered, so the soldier just falls to the ground apologizing, but Joss states that will not forgive him twice. After all, the right thing would be for him to have been killed trying to hurt his mother. However, he ended up being frivolous and forgiving, but still Rose didn't know how to take advantage of this opportunity. Joshua asks if he want to be like Lloyd and Gord's, and hear that one of the Centurions says that these two are not there because of the punishment that they received from Joshua. Meanwhile, Rose begs the boy to give her one more chance, so Joshua proposes that they crowd, and if Rose beats him, he will give him one more chance, and the soldier realizes that he will end up dead anyway. So he better at least give his all in the fight. So Rose remembers that her opponent is still a child. Therefore, he does have a chance of winning. That being said, he attacks Joshua full of confidence, but the boy plays away with a single blow. Joshua explains to the soldiers that they should never throw their enemy with based on appearance, as this could result in their death on the battlefield, so Joseph proposes to show more of his abilities for those who still have doubts. Then the 23rd Centurion leader goes to him and salutes him, and then everyone. The other leaders do the same, and when they see this, they say that the boy met his expectations exactly, so he promises to do his best to support him. As the training continues, Sherry goes back to the guest room Castle of As. In this, she remembers Joshua's rudeness and is sad about the situation. But Cox goes to her and tells her, informs that soon the Order of Knights will reach the Duchy. So she simply lies down again and asks. So he doesn't bother her anymore, and hear her so dejected. Cox asks if she's okay with this. Sherry asks again not to be uncomfortable and asks what happened to her father's orders. Then Cox apologizes and says he forgot the orders from his master for a short moment. Then he leaves her alone, just as Sherry asked. In the meantime, Joshua informs the Agnos that he executed a centurion because he was going around spreading rumors about his mother, and because account of the kingdom's military law being strict, Joshua just followed it and executed a citizen who insulted a nobly. In this, he asks if Agnos still thinks he acted recklessly, and Agnos just deduces that the boy has acted for a different reason than simply following the law. In this, Joshua explains that a few days ago he was still the son of a concubine who was thrown into care of the estates. However, he went on to receive everyone's approval just because of his sudden increase in strength. This also ended up generating a huge desire in the boy to put fear in the centurions who always humiliated him, so they would never try to mistreat his mother. Again, and to show that the Duke's blood runs through his veins, Joshua states that he needed to show his strength. Appropriately, in a place where all the centurions were gathered, in this Agnos notes that this is a very good strategy. Effective, however, he decides to end this discussion and asks the boy to get ready to leave and tells. Assessment of his mana. Agnos deduces that Joshua learned about this from the Imperial Knights in this. Joshua says he has already received orders, so the boy informs him that he will leave as soon as the wings. Preparations are made. Meanwhile, Duke Armstrong is surprised to discover that a junior C-rank knight has left his duchy. But Chiffon disqualifies Joseph's merits, calling him a concubine's son, and Armin realizes that Chiffon is worried that his position is in danger now that Babel lost to Joshua. I hear this and he gets angry. However, Agnes interrupts their fight and states that the order of the Imperial Knights is about to arrive, so they must maintain their posture as Armin comes face to face with Joshua and notices that the boy doesn't appear to be that strong. First sight, and then the Imperial Knights finally arrive and the room comes out of one of the carriages. Prince, in the case Kaisar von Britain, and seeing him Joshua is impressed to come face to face with him so soon. While a soldier is attacked by his master, so he asks his superior to stop, but Joker says no. Will receive orders from no one. Another man goes to him and explains that no one will enter the order of Knights of the Imperial Palace if he continues harassing the newcomers, but Joker says he was unable to resist. Because I saw the newbies showing off a lot just by using a little mana. That being said, Joker asks what brings that man there. He explains that he is just looking to fulfill the mission given by Vanessa, but he asks Joker to do it. This in its place, in which case Joker's mission is to ensure that Joshua never holds a sword again. So the prince goes to the boy and asks if he's the one talking about Joshua. He just stares at it with a lot hatred. So the prince's companion tells Joshua to show respect because he is in front of an important figure. However, the boy claims that in that kingdom there is only one emperor worthy of receiving the respect of all the knights of Avalon. Furthermore, Joshua asks why he needs to show respect to a self-proclaimed prince whose identity is not Clara, and upon hearing this, the leader of the knights orders everyone to go to Joshua, and Brown states that until shortly some time ago the boy was just a mediocre stable keeper, but before he could attack Joshua, Armin enters in front of both of them, and then he asks why he is defending the concubine's son, and he explains that the boy is also part of the Agnos Duchy. Now, and upon noticing this confusion, Agnos tells them to stop this little show in front of the prince. Brown sen. You too. Tremendous pressure exerted by Agnos, so do comments to Joshua that he caused all that confusion because of his hasty words. Therefore, he orders him to apologize to the prince. However, the prince himself claims that the kid isn't entirely wrong in what he said, and hearing it every time Grant tells him he should be more careful with his actions. After all, anything the prince does can impact the authority of the imperial family. But the boy states that because he has no power, he will only appear ridiculous if he decides to impose his pride on others. Furthermore, the Prince L reminds his servant that the only one who can receive respect from all the knights in the Empire, it is Agnos himself who said that he affirms all the knights that he is fine with that situation. Therefore they shouldn't worry. Furthermore, the prince explains that a knight proves his skills on his own merit. Therefore he is sure that Joshua knows the lack and importance of an unskilled knight and listens to him. Trying to come out on top with his trash talk, Joshua states that everything will be different in that new life because his goal is to slit the boy's throat when they're at their best at it. Joshua says he's ready for the boy to test his mana, but Joker gets in the way and kindly asks the prince to test his mana. Joshua's mana on his own because he is curious to know if the boy really has enough skill to. Blurring his speech and actions, the prince allows him to make the assessment but comes across the boy holding a metal stick. He wonders if the boy would be playing with him. Then the Joker D2 that the boy is just very confident. After all, everyone around praises him because the boy has talent, and hearing him talk so much, Joshua calls him of chatterbox and deduce that Imperial Knights are selected based on their ability to talk non-stop. That Joker states that the boy will regret what he said. After all, the mana test consists of a duel between the two, but before he could finish speaking, Joshua attacks him. Then Joker notices that the boy actually has a mana extremely heavy. However, he states that he will be fine if he reduces the distance between him and Joshua. However, the boy explains that everyone thinks about the same strategy when fighting him. So he found a way to cover this weakness in his training. That being said, he tries to defeat Joker again, and I watch the fight. The prince is surprised because even though he is very young, Josa is fighting on equal terms with the B-rank knight, but BRW reminds him that Joker is fighting only with the skills of a C rank, but still BRW is surprised by the boy's swordsmanship skill after all. He has never seen spear art before. Meanwhile, Joker despairs of ending that test with an answer favorable, otherwise Vanessa will bite his head off, so he decides to cheat on it. Joshua, who his opponent's power is surprising as expected from AB rank, and as for Joker, he advances with all his speed towards the boy and states that only Agnos can face him in this context, and upon seeing this, one of the nobles notices that Joker has risen to rank B, but now one just tells him to watch the fight. Joker notices that Joshua managed to defend himself by accumulating mana in a single point, but he claims that the boy won't be able to do that anyway. New because he has little mana left now. With that, Brown tells him to stop what he is doing. However, he continues his attack, causing an explosion in the area, but shortly after that, Joker notices that in the middle of his attack he ended up being pushed towards behind, and when the dust settles, Josa remains standing, but this time accompanied by Lukia, and when moving towards above the boy, Joker notices that Joshua's sword aura appears to be around that of a B-rank expert. Therefore, he believes it can be fixed if this continues like this, but Joker tells the boy that he is just spending energy concretizing his residual mana. Furthermore, he explains that colliding his B-rank sword aura in Joshua's C-rank mana and will cause severe internal damage to the boy, making his duty fulfilled. Meanwhile, Joshua begs Lukia to answer his call. Then an explosion takes over the place, causing a huge damage to the floor between the two, and upon noticing what the boy has in his hands, Chiffon calls that weapon a artifact, which in this case is a weapon saturated with magic, in which the prince feels that that is enough to end the test. After all, he was able to see that Joshua is incredible even though his knowledge about battle is small. So Bra understands the boy's point of view. Meanwhile, Joshua says he blocked his enemy's attacks. Joker states that the boy will be finished in his next attack, and Brown goes to the two to end the test, and he still appears to be amazed at having seen Joshua blocking Joker's B-rank attack and a simple mana test. Then he explains that Brown didn't imagine that the boy was stronger than him. However, his vision of the boy changed in that instant. After all, Josh is his true treasure. That said, he raises his gun to the boy, informs that according to his orders Joshua is definitely a C-rank knight, so Bra send the boy raises his sword as a way of revering this new achievement in his life, but Joshua feels that he is out of place because collaborating with these C-rank knight things was never his intention. Furthermore, the boy feels that he will end up fainting if he tries any harder, but he still makes one last effort to raise the sword. The last thing he wants is to show weakness because Joshua is determined to have his revenge on everyone at the right time. To avenge what they did. I find him in his past life. I notice the boy very thoughtful. Suddenly Agnos asks if everything is okay with him. In this, Josa realizes that he never saw this expression of concern on his father's face in his past life, so he surprises with the fact that his father can also feel compassion in this. He calmly responds that he is fine. Then they proclaim the birth of the youngest mana user on the entire continent, and that night there is a conference procedure in the Agnes Duchy in that on asks them to quickly move on to the most important matter. Meeting, and one of the men explains that all the knights who had been dispatched recently returned from nothing because apparently the number of monsters that appeared in the forest of creatures was multiplied, but the reason, the decisive factor that caused the knights' early return was the appearance of a black ogre in the monster horde, in which he explains that this is the strongest creature that usually appears in the forest of black creatures, also called the monster's refuge, but the monster, it also has enough strength to tear bodies as if they were made of paper, and in addition it can only be fought by a high-rank mage who is 4th class or higher, or a knight who is rank B and up and who is capable of using the aura of the sword. And upon hearing this, everyone is terrified and feels that this will be a great threat if he manages to access private lands. However, AS states that he will take care of this on his own, saying that he asks them to move on to the next topic. Then Armstrong informs them that the second topic in relation to the 5 of the married in this ag nos dedois, that the epicenter of the conversation is heading towards the source house, so he wonders if there would be a separate reason why Sherry and Cox went there. But Agnes decides to keep this matter private and says he will talk to Armstrong alone. Later said this, one of the meeting participants asks if anyone has anything to report, and Chiffon says, who needs to say something about Joshua's con, so he starts talking about the boy becoming a knight of C rank passing the con of Babel that said. Chiffon states that Joshua was someone Duchy had forgotten about completely until recently. After all, he gave the impression of being weak and lacking mana. Genetics, and taking these points into consideration, Chiffon wonders how a person like that could have become a C-rank knight out of nowhere, so he claims that something like that can't happen simply because he has talent at it. Chiffon suspects that Joshua took and borrowed the power of a demonic creature or beings, but there is something so extreme. Armin believes that his colleague is delusional, but Chiffon remembers the mysterious weapon that the boy used. Suddenly, a weapon that no one had ever seen or heard of before. That finger had that weapon, whether it was an artifact, because only they are capable of changing shape in this way, and in Joshua's case the weapon would be a spear. Chiffon guarantees that such power could never be contained in a simple spear. Furthermore, he reports that he felt a demonic hour when Joshua landed a blow on the player. Therefore, he attests that it was definitely demonic power in this. An argument breaks out between everyone, and they feel an imminent danger to the Duchy, and the Chiffon deduction is correct. After all, using black or demonic magic is something strictly prohibited, so in Half Sun, for this problem, a person suggests that they remove Joseph from the Duchy just as Chiffon planned, and speaking of the boy, he goes to the meeting room and states that if Chiffon is suspicious of his abilities, he can test him on his own. After all, if he does this, Chiffon will be able to assertively test whether the boy really borrowed the power of some creature. But upon hearing this, he doesn't react, because if Joseph's power is indeed his, Chiffon will take a big hit. The boy notices hesitating and states that Chiffon should at least have the desire to test it. After all, he is one of the 4 chief pillars who gave him the Duchy. Chiffon says that Joshua is overstepping his words, so the others tell him to calm down because he is in the presence of Agnes. Then Duke himself asks them both to stop and states that they are disregarding one thing about this. Armin understands right away what Agnos means, explains that the chief wizard Evergrande was present at the time of mana evaluation, so if Jay was using creature power he would have noticed, so Agnos guesses this matter involving Josa has been closed, but he states that there are still doubts to be clarified regarding the boy, because his sudden rise is in fact being hotly debated by everyone, including himself, and to understand better the forces of Joshua, Agnos will take you to the forest of creatures, but to listen to Duck's suggestion, everyone. They guarantee that the best thing to do is to leave this issue to the care of the writers. Furthermore, they remind you that Agnos will travel to academic soon, therefore he should prioritize his health in this. Armstrong says he agrees with the Condé, however, informs us that after cleaning the flowers of the creatures, his plan is to send Joshua to the Academy Imperial in the capital, because regardless of what they think about him, the boy is undeniably talented, therefore he will follow his family's rules and give the boy a fair chance. Sherfan becomes even more desperate because the Imperial Academy is beyond his reach, and if Joshua returns even stronger from the place, Count Babel will run the risk of being drawn into a succession war, so Chiffon plans to invent some excuse to prevent this happening. Joshua asks the Duke to go to the capital with his mother, but upon hearing this, Chiffon disputes this idea, at the time stating that Vanessa won't like this at all, but Joshua says he doesn't care what she will do. Furthermore, she has no power to stop Agnos from doing something so trivial, and Chiffon feels helpless because he can't disagree with what the boy said about that, so he says he's worried about Duke Agnes' image, because if he allows this perk for Lucia, it could generate rumors that he has favoritism for her. However, allows Joshua to take his mother to the capital. Even so, Annie feels that he is not a normal boy after all. He feels something different coming from Joshua, who not even Babel had, and as for the Condé, they prefer not to clash with Agnes' decision, and when they settled everything, Agnes asked Harston to go to his room with the knight, dispatched like this. That the source family reports are classified, and in addition to him, Agnes asks Joshua to also go to his room, but Babel appears just in time and explains that he needed to take time to reflect alone, so he couldn't attend the meeting earlier, but he noticed that Babel also appeared to have a very different aura from before. Then he asks what exactly the boy came to tell him. Then he turns to Joss, and the boy wonders if Babel had a question to do to him, but upon hearing the ironic way in which Josa addressed the boy Chiffon, she becomes indignant and reminds him that Babel is in a position above him, so he should mind his manners. On this, Joshua asks if it's him whoever speaks for Babel. Then Chiffon doesn't understand anything, but the boy explains better what he meant and states that he always acted like a loyal puppy from Babel. Furthermore, the boy ends his humiliation by saying that he is just a noble. Honorary thanks to Duke Agnes. I hear this. Chiffon notes that the boy is right after all. He has the limit of which he can cross into the Duchy, otherwise he will be duly removed from his role. I reflect on this. Chiffon simply states that Joshua should know basic courtesy etiquette, but Joshua states that if he wants to be heard, Chiffon must prove himself worthy by rising his ranks. In this, Babel notes that Joshua is right in what he says, and listening to this, Agnes notices that Babel's looks changed from a smug boy to a true knight, so the boy states that understood the meaning of proving yourself with your own abilities. Having said that, Babel states that he will also become more strong, because only then will he be able to look at Joshua as an equal, and he says he will abandon the position of heir. Formal Agnes from then on. Although this surprised everyone, Babel guarantees that he did not lose his confidence, because a talented competitor has emerged. In case he wants to have a fair competition with Joshua, then he decides to grant this to the boy, and as he leaves the meeting he gets excited because the Duchy is starting to change for something apparently good. Meanwhile, Chiffon informs Vanessa about Babel giving up his position as heir, and also comments about Joshua going to the capital with Lucia, and upon hearing this she starts to break everything and claims to be controlling his fury since the time the Centurions failed, so this news would certainly leave Vanessa upset, so Chiffon apologizes and says that she should have done something to stop this, but she claims that he could do anything. After all, Babel is very headstrong, Dora, and she wouldn't listen to him, saying that she explains that if Josa managed to take their son's place, they had to inform a certain person about her situation. But Chiffon for her to calm down, because something like this would never happen. But Vanessa is still curious to know what's next. Joshua steps in this way that the Duke will take her to the locked territory the next day. After all, the forest of creatures are causing problems again,
Iria
and
para
Agnos
se
is heading there with the
jantar,
intention of
mas
cleaning up the place.
vamos que
Alone,
vamos
and after
ver
that,
o
he will go to the
isso vai
capital with
dar.
Lucia,
Se
but
você
Vanessa
quiser
says that she will invite him for one
continuação,
last dinner.
deixe
Before he leaves, and to be
comentário
quite
aí
honest, I wouldn't
embaixo,
go to this dinner, but let's
like
see what
e
this will
se
lead to. If you
inscreve
want the
no
continuation,
canal que eu vou
leave a
estar
comment below,
trazendo o mais
like and
rápido
subscribe to the channel, and
possível.
I'll be
Eu
there,
vejo
bringing it as soon as
vocês
possible,
no
and I'll see you in the
próximo
next video. I went.
vídeo. Fui!